This is Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. Tonight, Aaron Hernandez, an NFL star whose rise and fall reads like a collision between talent, tragedy, and lots of unanswered questions. You know the headlines: Pro Bowl tight end, $40 million extension, arrested for murder less than a year later, convicted, acquitted in another case, and dead by suicide before appeals finished. But beneath the headlines, a braided story of childhood trauma, alleged violence, secrecy, and a post-mortem diagnosis that changed how many of us tried to understand what happened. On this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Leon Ramirez-Leon. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Maya. Glad to be here. Tough subject, but important.
Leon is a forensic psychologist who consults on athlete mental health. He's worked with NCAA programs and former NFL players on trauma, brain injury, and the kinds of behavioral problems that appear in elite sports. In this conversation, we'll try to unpack the evidence, the psychology, and the unresolved threads that keep this case alive in public memory. I want to be clear up front. We'll talk about violence and a convicted murderer. We'll also center the victims: Odin Lloyd, Daniel Dabray, Safiro Furtado, and the families who lost them. We'll try not to collapse complexity into tidy answers. This is an episode about questions as much as facts.
That's a good frame, Maya. And for listeners, we'll talk about traumatic brain injury, identity, and institutional choices, but we'll do so carefully. Correlation is not causation, and nuance matters.
Right. So let's start at the beginning. Aaron Hernandez was born November 6, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut, working class, sports-focused. His dad, Dennis, had played college ball and was a disciplinarian. His mother, Terry, worked multiple jobs. According to later reporting and interviews with family, the home could be volatile: physical and verbal abuse, heavy drinking. That kind of early environment is a key thread. Leon, what does developmental science tell us about growing up in that environment?
Well, childhood exposure to violence and inconsistent caregiving matters a lot. It doesn't determine outcomes, but it shapes stress response systems. Think HPA axis, emotional regulation, attachment. A teen like Aaron, who loses a father unexpectedly at 16, faces a major rupture. Grief, plus a lack of stable scaffolding, can push someone toward peer groups that provide belonging. Sometimes those groups encourage risky or criminal behavior.
Jonathan, Aaron's brother, and others have described the father's death in January 2006 as a turning point. Attendance dropped, peer choices shifted, more defiant behavior. But Aaron was also a standout athlete, Bristol Central star in football, basketball, track. He had national attention, Gatorade Player of the Year in Connecticut. That dual life, idolized on the field, turbulent off, feels important.
Absolutely. Sport can be a ladder out of instability, but it can also create a split identity, highly praised, yet carrying private wounds. That split can amplify risk-taking because there's a lot at stake, and a player might feel invulnerable or entitled.
He committed to the University of Florida, flipped from UConn, and played on Urban Meyer's teams, sharing the field with Tim Tebow, winning a national title. He won the John Mackey Award in 2009 as the country's best tight end. But this period also included what many outlets call red flags: failed drug tests for marijuana, bar fights, incidents that were apparently handled internally. Leon, what do institutions handling these incidents privately tell us about accountability?
When universities prioritize athletic success, disciplinary matters are sometimes managed quietly. Counseling, fines, curfews, so as not to damage the program. That can create a consequence asymmetry. Star players avoid public sanctions that others would face. For the athlete, the message becomes performance shields you. That doesn't excuse violence, but it does create an environment where risky behavior can escalate unchecked.
Right. After college, he fell to the 4th round in the 2010 draft. Teams worried about character concerns, marijuana, possible gang ties, and the Patriots picked him. He quickly outperformed his draft slot, forming a dynamic 2 tight end combo with Rob Gronkowski. Then, in August 2012, the Patriots extended him with a 5-year deal worth up to $40 million. 11 months later, he would be arrested for murder.
That contract is one of those fulcrum moments. Teams are balancing talent and risk. The Patriots did background checks, had security concerns, but decided to invest. Whether that investment reduced pressure to change or gave social proof that nothing would truly derail him, that's an open question.
And in the arc between college and the NFL, a pattern emerges in reporting: quick resort to violence over perceived slights. The Boston double homicide in July 2012, Daniel De Abreu and Safiro Furtado, was a drive-by after leaving a nightclub. Prosecutors later alleged Hernandez was angry after a spilled drink and hunted them down. He wasn't immediately a suspect.
That kind of reactive aggression on perceived disrespect is often socially learned. In hypermasculine contexts, slights are sometimes recalibrated as threats to reputation. Add guns and access, and you have a dangerous mix.
There's also the Alexander Bradley shooting in Florida. Bradley survived, lost an eye, later became a key witness. Prosecutors argued that was an attempt to intimidate Bradley because he knew too much about the 2012 murders. Bradley filed civil suit and later testified in the Boston trial.
Bradley's story is complicated. His relationship with Hernandez looked transactional at times, friend, sometimes fixer, which muddies how we interpret loyalties and threats. Forensic psychology would say such networks can both protect and entrap an athlete.
This brings us to Odin Lloyd, who he was, how he connected to Hernandez, and the night of June 16-17, 2013. Odin Lloyd was a semi-pro linebacker, dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, Cheyenne. He worked regular jobs, helped his family, described as quiet and hardworking. On June 14, 2013, Lloyd and Hernandez were at Rumor nightclub. Witnesses said Hernandez seemed upset and left early. 2 nights later, Hernandez texted Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, "You can't trust anyone anymore," according to one report, and they drove from Connecticut to Massachusetts. Surveillance and cell tower data showed Hernandez, Ortiz, Wallace picking up Lloyd. He sent texts to his sister. "Did you see who I am with? NFL. Just so you know." Those texts were later discussed at trial as possibly flaunting, possibly fearful. The court ultimately restricted how the jury could use them.
Those last texts are haunting because they are ambiguous. When someone texts, "just so you know," that can be a boast, a warning, or an attempt to reassure. Ambiguity leaves room for narrative overlay. Psychologically, people under threat produce ambiguous signals. Some will broadcast association with powerful friends to feel safer.
At about 3 a.m. on June 17th, gunshots near an industrial park in North Attleborough. Lloyd was shot multiple times and found later that morning. Keys in his pocket matched a car rented by Hernandez. CCTV showed a vehicle leaving and returning to Hernandez's home around the time. And evidence, ammunition, clothing, was later found in a Franklin flophouse Hernandez had rented. Motive? Still unclear. Proposals? Lloyd knew too much. A nightclub slight, or a paranoid snap.
And motive is the hardest thing. From a clinical perspective, violence can be instrumental, planned, or reactive, impulsive, in the face of perceived betrayal. The evidence prosecutors presented tried to stitch a planned narrative: recruitment of Ortiz and Wallace, the drive, the disposal. The defense argued circumstantial evidence and lack of a direct eyewitness who saw Hernandez fire the weapon.
Let's walk through the investigation. Within days, the media descended: helicopters, cameras. On June 26, 2013, Hernandez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and weapons offenses. 90 minutes later, the Patriots released him. Ortiz and Wallace were also arrested in the following days. Hernandez denied bail and was held at Bristol County Jail.
The optics were extraordinary. For the athlete, immediate social identity collapse occurs. The fan base, teammates, the culture you are embedded in, everything fractures. That can exacerbate mental health crises in detention.
The Odin Lloyd trial in 2015. What did prosecutors rely on? Cell records, surveillance, ammunition matches, behavior after the crime, like alleged destruction of surveillance footage and cleaning the house, plus statements from associates. Defense argued circumstantial, no direct proof of the shooter. The jury convicted Hernandez of first-degree murder on April 15, 2015. Mandatory life without parole.
From what I saw in court reporting, the prosecution built a mosaic. Mosaic cases rely on many small pieces creating a picture. Psychologically, juries respond to narrative coherence. If the mosaic points one way, the jury will supply the rest. The defense's job was to create enough doubt showing plausible alternative explanations for each piece.
Short interruption. Viewers sometimes ask, why didn't someone simply say, "I saw him pull the trigger"? That's the heart of it. Many involved had ties to Hernandez and reasons to be silent or self-protective. Both Ortiz and Wallace later faced accessory charges, plea deals, or various outcomes. That patchwork of cooperation complicated the search for direct witnesses.
And witness psychology matters. People in tight social networks fear retribution. They may lie, omit, or confuse sequencing. Add substances, memory decay, reliability drops.
Now, fast forward to the second trial, the 2012 Boston double homicide. Hernandez was indicted in 2014 for the murders of Abreu and Furtado. This trial, in 2017, featured Jose Bez as defense counsel, and the prosecution relied heavily on Alexander Bradley's testimony that Hernandez fired into the car. Bez undermined Bradley's credibility, argued Bradley could be the shooter, and the jury acquitted Hernandez of the double murders on April 14, 2017, though he was convicted of illegal gun possession.
A year later, that acquittal and its emotional release for Hernandez creates a psychological paradox. On one level, a legal vindication. On another, the weight of the life sentence still sitting in a different case. For someone with severe brain pathology or major psychological distress, that mix can be destabilizing.
5 days after the acquittal, on April 19, 2017, Hernandez died by suicide in his cell. He hanged himself and was pronounced dead after being cut down. He had stuffed cardboard into his cell door to impede entry. There were notes and religious references. Some reports said John 3:16 was written somewhere. Leon, how do we make sense of that final act in context?
Suicide, especially in jail, is multi-determined. Factors often include hopelessness, shame, loss of control, impulsivity, and sometimes brain dysfunction. His acquittal may have been emotionally significant, but it came on top of a life sentence for Lloyd's murder, appeals unresolved, and the collapse of his public identity. For someone with potential CTE-related impulse control deficits and mood dysregulation, the capacity for planning a suicide increases, especially in the crucible of incarceration.
Which leads us to the post-mortem brain findings. Boston University examined Hernandez's brain and diagnosed stage 3 CTE, unusually severe for a 27-year-old. Frontal lobe degeneration, widespread tau protein. BU researchers said it was one of the worst cases they'd seen in someone his age. What do we actually know, and what remains speculative about CTE's role in behavior like this?
CTE is a neuropathological diagnosis, tau protein accumulation in certain brain regions. Clinically, it's been associated with mood disorders, impulsivity, cognitive inflexibility, and behavioral dysregulation. But important caveats. First, CT is a post-mortem diagnosis. Second, the presence of CT doesn't map cleanly onto specific criminal acts. Not everyone with CT is violent, and not all violent people have CT. Third, the science is evolving. Causality is complex, and individual differences matter.
The BU study that examined many former NFL brains found high rates of CTE among donated brains, but those samples are biased. Families donated brains often because players had concerning symptoms. Still, the severity in Hernandez at a young age makes people ask whether head trauma contributed meaningfully to his downfall.
It's a fair question. Severe frontal lobe pathology can impair judgment, reduce inhibition, and increase emotional reactivity. Those changes lower the threshold for impulsive violence, but we have to be cautious. Environmental factors, learned behaviors, substance use, personality, and social context are all co-conspirators. The question isn't, did CT cause the crimes, but to what extent did brain injury interact with a lifetime of risk factors to shape behavior?
Listeners will hear the temptation to simplify. If he had CT, then he's a victim too. But that narrative risks diminishing accountability and the experiences of the victims. How do we hold both truths, the reality of brain injury and the reality of harm?
We hold them by resisting binary thinking. A person can be both injured by the sport they loved and responsible for actions they took. The clinical community should advocate for prevention, early intervention, and treatment for injured athletes. The legal system still has to adjudicate acts of violence. Understanding CTE can inform sentencing, rehabilitation, and care without absolving responsibility.
Let's pivot to another charged, often sensationalized topic: sexuality and identity. Documentaries and reporting suggested Hernandez had same-sex relationships, perhaps struggled with his sexuality in a hyper-masculine environment. Some former teammates have said he was bisexual or gay. Others dismiss it as gossip. Why does this thread get so much attention? And what, if anything, does it tell us?
Sexual identity can be an important piece of someone's emotional landscape, especially if they feel they must hide it. Internalized shame, fear of exposure, and the need to perform a masculine persona can create tremendous psychological strain. For some people, that strain contributes to self-destructive behaviors. But we must be careful. Linking sexuality with violent crime in a way that implies causation is stigmatizing and unfounded. The real question is how secrecy and shame about anything might have compounded his distress.
That's an important distinction. The point is not to pathologize queerness, but to note how forced secrecy in macho subcultures can contribute to internal turmoil. The Netflix documentary Killer Inside spent substantial time on this angle, along with prison phone calls and family interviews. It was praised for depth, but criticized for sensationalism and use of Hernandez's daughter in promotional material. Jose Baez criticized it too.
Right. True crime media must navigate ethical lines, how to explore identity without exploiting it, and how to center victims instead of turning crimes into entertainment. We need sober reporting that respects privacy and context.
Now, institutions, Florida, the Patriots, the NFL, did they enable or ignore a pattern? The Patriots reportedly had security concerns but still extended him a big contract. Florida reportedly handled drug tests and bar fights internally. Is this a singular failure or symptom of systemic leniency towards star athletes?
There's a systemic dynamic. High-performance sports organizations often valorize winning over welfare. That can translate to informal tolerance of misconduct if the athlete contributes on the field. Additionally, the structures for mental health care in collegiate and professional sports are under-resourced. When institutions fail to escalate interventions or require accountability, patterns can persist and escalate.
Fans often ask, could the Patriots have done more? Should teams be policing personal conduct? It's messy. Privacy, labor rights, and public safety collide. But when human harm is repeatedly alleged and mishandled, institutions should be held to account.
Agreed. Teams must balance support and oversight. That means rigorous background checks, proactive mental health support, and clear disciplinary pathways that don't bend solely because of talent.
Let's look at the co-defendants and the ripple effects. Carlos Ortiz pled guilty to accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 4.5 to 7 years. Ernest Wallace was acquitted of murder, but convicted as an accessory. Cheyenne Jenkins, Hernandez's fiancée, had perjury charges dismissed. These people's lives were upended, families fractured, plea deals, resentments, and fear. It's a reminder the fallout extends far beyond one person.
Yes, in violent networks, consequences spread. People get caught between loyalty, fear, and the legal system. Those dynamics make it harder to reconstruct truth. The social fabric that could have provided clear eyewitness testimony instead becomes frayed.
We also need to talk about legal technicalities. After Hernandez's death, Massachusetts followed the doctrine of abatement ab initio. His conviction was vacated because his appeals weren't finished. That infuriated Odin Lloyd's family. Then, in 2019, the state's highest court ended that doctrine and reinstated the conviction. That legal back and forth felt like an erasure and then a partial restoration. What does that say about justice for victims?
Legal doctrines are meant to balance fairness to defendants with finality for victims. Abatement was rooted in old principles, but in practice, it created pain for victims' families. The 2019 decision aimed to protect victims from the legal fiction of erasure after a defendant's death. Justice systems must center victims' needs while upholding defendants' rights. It's a delicate balance.
Now, media and memory. Besides Netflix, there were many long-form pieces. Boston Globe, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone. For some, Hernandez is a cautionary, wasted talent story. For others, he's a case study in intersecting risks, trauma, brain injury, and institutional failure. Which memory is more honest?
Both narratives can be true. Memory is often multidimensional. But I would push for a memory that keeps victims central, acknowledges systemic factors, and resists turning tragedy into spectacle. That means thoughtful journalism and public debate that avoid easy scapegoats or simple redemption arcs.
Before we close, Leon, can we address the central, still unanswered questions? I want to list them and have you respond briefly to each. First, the exact motive in Odin Lloyd's murder: fear of him talking, a nightclub slight, or a sudden paranoid snap?
We'll probably never know with absolute certainty. My assessment? Likely a mix. Paranoia about being exposed, reaction to perceived disrespect, and an environment that normalized violence. Combine that with access to guns and a small network willing to follow orders, dangerous synergy.
Second, the full truth about the 2012 Boston double homicide. Was Hernandez the shooter?
Legally, he was acquitted, but many questions linger. Evidence and witness testimony pointed in different directions. Without a smoking gun witness or definitive forensic link, the answer remains contested.
Third, how much did CTE matter? Would he have lived differently without it?
We can't flip a switch and know. The severity of his CTE at a young age suggests it likely contributed to impulse control and emotional dysregulation. But it operated alongside long-standing environmental and personality factors. So CTE mattered, but not as an exclusive cause.
Fourth, what did institutions know and when? Could Florida, the Patriots, or the NFL have intervened more meaningfully?
They knew enough to have concerns. Whether they could or would have intervened effectively is uncertain. But in hindsight, stronger oversight and mental health resources might have helped, or at least detected escalation earlier.
Fifth, sexuality and identity. Was internalized shame a significant driver?
Potentially. If someone feels they must hide a core part of themselves, the resulting chronic stress can exacerbate dysfunction. But it's not a causal explanation for violence. It's a contextual factor that may have deepened emotional turmoil.
Sixth, why did he take his own life 5 days after an acquittal that looked like a legal victory?
People do not act only rationally. The acquittal may have relieved some legal pressure, but opened others. Appeals, looming civil suits, unresolved identity issues. For someone with mood instability and frontal lobe damage, that combination can precipitate suicide.
And finally, how we tell this story. Are we complicit in turning tragedies into entertainment?
Yes, there's a collective responsibility. True crime consumers and creators must prioritize ethical storytelling, foreground victims, avoid voyeurism, and use stories to advocate for prevention and care rather than mere spectacle.
Those answers still leave us with a sense of ambiguity. Before we end, I want to say something to listeners. If you're tempted by tidy narratives, it was just the brain, or he was a monster, pause. Human lives, even notorious ones, are messy. That mess contains victims, institutional choices, and unanswered threads that won't be soothed by clickbait.
And if you're someone working in athletics, coach, clinician, administrator, this case is a reminder to take signs seriously. Mood swings, impulsivity, secrecy, escalating violence. Don't normalize red flags in the name of production.
A few practical notes. For listeners who want to learn more, our episode notes include links to public reporting from the Boston Globe, Sports Illustrated, the Netflix documentary, and medical overviews on CTE from Boston University. We've relied on court records and reporting to ground our discussion.
If any listener is wrestling with thoughts of suicide or severe mental distress, please reach out. Call your local crisis line or 988 in the U.S. There are resources and people who want to help. Violence leaves so many living people in need of care.
we'll close with a list of still unanswered threads for you to carry with you and for me to keep returning to in future episodes. Motive in Odin Lloyd's murder, the full truth of the Abreu and Furtado killings, the exact role of CTE, the institutional blind spots of Florida, the Patriots, and the NFL, the effect of secrecy around identity, and the reasons behind his final act. And of course, the lives. Odin Lloyd, Daniel de Abreu, Safiro Furtado, and Alexander Bradley. Their stories should remain central, not eclipsed by the celebrity of the man who harmed them.
I want to add one last thought. Cases like this demand humility from professionals and the public. We can investigate and theorize, but we must also listen to victims' families, to communities, and to the science as it evolves. That humility honors the people who most deserve it.
Thank you, Leon. And to our listeners, thank you for staying with us through a difficult story. If you have thoughts or tips about other still unanswered cases you want us to examine, reach out. We'll keep trying to tell complicated stories with care. This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison, produced and edited by our team. Credits in the episode notes. Be well.